now my pleasure to welcome to the stage our panelists today. If they go ahead and join me on stage along with Raphael Bostic. And let me say too that think about questions that you can ask. We have the microphone right over here, and we're going to give a few minutes after the panel goes through the discussion. If they'll go ahead and come on stage, please. This is a panel today that Raphael will give a little introduction, and we'll then turn it over to Dan Gordon, our fellow Rotarian, who will moderate this panel discussion along with Christian and Jeff and Deborah. So with that, let me turn it over to Raphael for a discussion on our partnership for inclusive innovation.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really good to be here. I have to say, before I get to my remarks, I didn't expect we'd have New Jersey in the house. So, yeah, I'm a Jersey boy myself, so it's really good to have you. Thank you again for the serenade and a tremendous national anthem. It's very well done, so I look forward to that. So it's an absolute personal privilege to be able to introduce this panel this morning. I love innovative ideas, and the partnership is really one that is trying to create a different kind of model for impact. The question about a public-private partnership and the ways that it can make a difference for change, that was an idea that was in Jeff Duncan's mind when he thought about this and started calling around to see if people would agree to help support and stand this up. I have had the privilege to be in that role, and it's been quite wonderful. Now, you may not remember this, but Jeff and I introduced publicly the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation at a Rotary meeting 3 years ago. Right? This was the kickoff, and it was an amazing thing. Now, I'll forgive you if you didn't remember, because it was during the time of COVID and we weren't in a room together. So you just saw me on a screen, and that's how it turned out. But this was the origin of this idea, and it's really just amazing to see where PIN has gone. Now, we call it PIN. I don't like acronyms, but everyone in the group uses it, so I'm going to say that anyway. And it has really defined what change can mean in Atlanta, in Georgia, and now it's expanding across the southeastern United States to make an amazing difference. Today, PIN has launched over 100 projects, deployed 200 technologies, created 620 new businesses, and increased access to financial and social capital throughout the ecosystem, and in particular in communities that have not historically seen capital flow there. So it is quite remarkable. They provided around $2.3 million worth of financial support and technical assistance, and have unlocked with that a little more than $2 million, more than $17 million. So for those of you who do math, that's more than 7-to-1 return on investment. By pretty much any metric, you're going to be happy with that. So this has been really a remarkable thing. Now, for today, we have, I would say we have two goals. One is just to share more about the learnings that we have had and what it takes to build public-private partnerships, especially in the context of catalyzing innovation, because ultimately, if you want to get a different outcome, you got to do different things, and we need to hear from different voices and get those different ideas in place, and that's wonderful. And another goal is really to spark your thinking on this, to get your ideas and insights on what more we can all do collectively with the community to support inclusive growth. So that's my role. I'm done. I'm going to now turn this over to our panelists to take the show. And so for Dan Gordon, Kristen Charno, Jeff Duncan, and Deborah Lamb, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, Rotary, and President Bostic, thank you for all of you do at the Fed, as well as a founding member of PIN, as well as a Rotarian. We appreciate you very much. First, I just wanted to begin by sharing 2 minutes of opening remarks and context, but I'd like to thank Commissioner Nunn and also all the members of PIN that are here as guests today or have some tie to PIN. There's 11 Rotarians and many other friends of Rotary. If you could please stand so we could recognize in case you have any questions about this after the program. Anyone who's a guest of PIN today, if you could please stand. Thank you. Or on the board. Thank you. And Chris Womack sends his warmest regards. He's the current chair of PIN, and he had to be in Vegas today, and we are extremely well represented by the vice chair today as well. So we thank you all. I was honored to serve as the chief operating officer of the city of Atlanta, and that's where I truly began to understand public-private partnerships. But that mindset was very different. You'll hear how PIN is continuing to innovate, as President Bostic shared. 4 reasons came to mind primarily for why we did public-private partnerships at the city and in government. One would be it can accelerate things happening because you can leverage future capital flows, money, or just get it done faster. Another reason could be that it's more efficient to work with the private sector. It can also reduce risk by sharing and spreading it, and importantly, to drive economic stimulus and social impact that may not occur without that type of relationship. So those are common reasons why public-private partnerships happen. 3 recent ones, as AJ knows with his great work downtown, examples that we wanted to share, and Rotary and Eloisa Clementic as well, is 2 Peachtree, where the government's investing tens of millions of dollars to further support downtown's success and to drive affordable housing in that area. That's a great example of a very recent public-private partnership with the current administration, and we thank Eloisa too for her work there. Another example is Ponce City Market. Think about what that building was like before the city and the public and private came together with our friend Matt at Jamestown. And last but not least, of course, the Beltline and Delta's relationship with the airport. There's many other examples. But what you're hearing about today, really inspired by Jeff and Kristen and Deb's wonderful work as ED, is truly a national example for how to do it, where you do shared economic prosperity beyond those typical areas. So we are a national leader in this space, and the board and the people that Deb has attracted is amazing. And my last comment is in 2018, our great state General Assembly did a fantastic job updating our legislation. It was that important to be competitive as a state in this area for public and private partnerships. So we are much better positioned as a legal entity from the state standpoint to do these types of arrangements. I hope you learn a lot more about this topic, and we are going to learn from some of the leading experts at this point in time. So thank you again for being here. Okay, we're going to start, Kristen, with you, and thank you again for being vice chair.
Pleasure to be here. I got called up.
But Kristen, as you see, is an incredible leader and also very academically accomplished at Inspire Brands. We thank you for that. But tell us a little bit more about the corporate why. Why are you involved in this? Why does this matter?
Yeah. Well, first of all, good afternoon. Thank you for having us. And this is my first Rotary event, so not a bad way to start. So thank you. For Inspire Brands, for those that don't know about Inspire, we are a restaurant company with roughly 32,000 restaurants around the world, about 30 billion in system sales. So the question is, why would we care about local partnerships? Our whole thesis is about franchising, and a lot of our growth is through franchising or net unit growth. So the general premise of what we're doing, we've been very active in inorganic growth. We've put together a lot of brands that you may know, from Arby's, Buffalo Wild Wings, I have to do this, Baskin Robbins, Sonic, Jimmy John's, Dunkin'. So these are all brands people know every day, but what they might not know is that usually your interaction with those brands are through local franchisees, local business owners. And our whole premise by putting these brands together is that they would be better servants to those individual business folks because they can do things at scale that the local entrepreneur cannot. So if you think about franchising, at least in our business, it's leveraging the scale that we can do in data and analytics and supply chain and combining that with the entrepreneurial grit, know-how of local business folks. And the result of that partnership, if you just look at the numbers, typical franchise generates double the revenue of a non-franchise business comparably. They create twice as many jobs. So you think about the local impact that you can have there. On workforce development, our estimate, 65% of every adult in the United States has worked in a restaurant at some point in time. So you think about workforce development. And if you think about upward mobility, which is a key theme for us, across all underrepresented groups, if you think about veterans, minorities, women, overrepresented, or should be, more representation in franchising than you have in normal businesses. So if you think about first-generation Americans, second-generation Americans, a lot of those jobs that folks are getting early on, it's through franchising businesses. And you think about the wealth creation of that, both for the individuals, their families, and their communities, and the path that it puts them on, that's the basis of our business. So when we have an opportunity like this, to participate in public-private partnerships. Not all businesses are franchising, but they all have an element of it. It's going to be something that we are wholeheartedly into because we see the value that it can drive.
Thank you very much. Well, Jeff, first I want to thank your son for joining us today. We're so glad to host you, have you as a part of this program.
He's my newest employee.
Their newest employee, too. Fabulous. Well, Jeff, thank you again for your vision for this and all you do for our state. I would love to hear a little bit more about any opening comments you have as a visionary for this, but also talk about the geographic diversity across the state, the rural, the urban, and everything in between, and how that plays into the strategy.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here and see so many familiar faces and friends and business partners and folks that just like me because I went to Georgia Tech. It's great to be here. It certainly is. And this is truly an amazing kind of full circle, knowing that this was, as Raphael talked about, this was the launch point during the midst of COVID, and to see the accelerated growth. And Deborah, you've just continued to do an amazing job from day in and day out. What Christian just explained is every business in America, in the world for that matter, is a technology company at heart, right? Just the way the economy is built, every business is a technology company, even down to where this whole notion started in rural versus urban. So take you back to 2017, I was running for lieutenant governor, and it's a statewide journey, right? It's get in a car, 5 o'clock in the morning, drive as far south as you can make it on a tank of gas, get out and try to meet as many people in that town as you can, mayors, business owners, educators, influencers, and any way you can get folks to hear your message. And I kept getting asked the same question over and over and over again in rural Georgia. And it was kind of point to the end of the main street and say, what are you going to do to bring that textile mill back? And I guess I could have given a political answer, and I could have said, well, we're going to create workforce development, and we're going to have jobs, and we're going to incentivize those jobs to come back from offshore to onshore. But the reality is that business wasn't coming back in the way it operated 40 years ago. It was, we wanted to become the technology capital of the East Coast, and to do that, we had to give them the tools necessary to leapfrog from a 40-year-ago economy in those small towns. So to do that, we had to embrace a public-private partnership, one that took a tremendous amount of value on how we partnered with the local K through 12, how we built a relationship with the technical schools, how we became an actionable partner for the private sector, somewhere where they felt comfortable to invest to help solve their problems. And so it just continued to gain momentum, and I think folks believed me, but there was a big gap between that idea and the reality of actually creating it. And that's just the perfect storm showed up with Deborah and President Bud Peterson and the original group that got together that really tried to play this out and tease out this idea. Our private sector partner showed up, our state partner showed up, and the communities have shown up in a way that I think is really an incredibly good investment, as Raphael explained.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Deb, you and I met when I was at the city, and I was so impressed by you, and thank you for helping us in so many projects there. And now you're a published author and leading PIN and doing amazing work. I congratulate you on all your success. In a very short time, your work has led to 100 projects across all economic development districts in Georgia, so what diversity that is. And then you engage with over 150 student interns and fellows to teach our next generation as well, which is fabulous. Can you talk about one or two examples to make this more real for our audience today that you're proud of?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, President Yates, for inviting us here, and it's really just great to be back to talk about the partnership, as we said. So just to bring this more concretely, as was noted, like at the end of the day, we are a public-private partnership that invests in inclusive innovation solutions for upward mobility and economic growth. But how do we actually do that? So we can talk a lot about the principles, but what does it mean on the ground reality, when Jeff and others travel across the state? Fundamental to our work is working in partnership with the local community. So this is rural Georgia, urban Georgia, everything in between, and we find what the problem is, whatever the problem is. This could be transportation, energy, housing, whatever that problem is, we hone in on that problem and we think about possibilities. We think about possible solutions, we think about what can be done. And so behind every project, we think, what could be a good project for a student team to work on? What could be a good project for a research team to work on? What could be a good project for an entrepreneurial team to work on? And then we formulate and craft that project with the community in mind, working in partnership. Now this brings twofold. On one hand, the community gets critical access to R&D that they otherwise wouldn't have, and they actually are part of the solution. And on the other hand, as Dan's talking about, you get experiential learning, you get workforce development, you get pro-action learning happening. A really good example is something that actually we did in Thomasville Heights. People here are pretty familiar. Lots of good efforts happening all across the board, from the city to private sector, et cetera. We honed in on an energy efficiency project where Thomasville Heights, with a partnership with the City of Atlanta, Focus Community Partners, which is the nonprofit, And then Morehouse School of Medicine and then Georgia Tech formed together a team where they used drones to conduct energy audits over the building. And then with that, we're able to find targeted solutions to affect the heating and cooling of the residents. Not only were the residents involved in this, but then the researchers got to actually apply the research R&D into the community and get active feedback so that their research would get better. The end of this project not only produced improvements in thermal comfort for the residents immediately, but they also saw cost savings through their energy bills. And this is something that we're very proud of, that included researchers, students, private sector, public sector, all involved. And our notion was that if this can be done in Thomasville Heights, it can also be done elsewhere. So every time we have these over 100 projects, it's always first starting with what the problem is in the community, and then thinking about who the actors are, and then what the actors can contribute, and then what could be shared, scaled, and deployed in more places.
Well, that's a good example. It helps with inflation offset. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to you next, Jeff. At this section, we're going to have each of our panelists speak. One is corporate, one is government, and also corporate now, I'd say, and business. And then obviously you have academic with Deborah representing Georgia Tech in her role as well. But we'd love to hear a little bit more, Jeff, from a public sector perspective with your experience there. What tangible benefits did you see and do you see today from these types of relationships?
Yeah, I've often said this really, truly, in my time around being in elected office, is probably one of the best examples of a public-private partnership and how it works. I think Raphael had mentioned this early in his speech, was this really accelerates us into so many different lanes. And I think one of those areas that it accelerates us into is relationships. Because of the public-private partnership, it allows our private sector partners to leverage long-standing relationships in the public sector, and it accelerates us into K through 12. You're carried into those conversations, into those problem-solving situations with a tailwind of relationships that have already been established. And so it just continues to be this centrifuge of energy that just continues to roll through each and every community. I think one of the secret sauces for this quick success for this organization has been we don't smell anything like politics, right? Like so often ideas, public-private partnerships start in the incubator of politics, right? It's like, hey, let's go solve something for a short-term sugar high called an election, and then it just dies, right? Then the day after the election, nobody really talks about it anymore because mission accomplished. What makes this so successful is this is truly a policy-driven. It invites everybody from all sides, political sides, to join in the conversation in what looks to be first Georgia. We wanted to be the technology capital of the East Coast, but now an even broader look as to how do we take this message to build an even broader movement across the Southeast. And to me, that really truly ends up being, I think, a lot of the secret sauce. People aren't scared to come partner with us, especially our private sector partners.
Thank you. Kristen, I'll ask you to share a little bit more from a corporate perspective or any other vice chair comments you see globally for across all three sectors.
Well, I moved here 6 years ago because of what we're seeing in franchising and growth in that sector here in Atlanta and the broader Southeast. I mean, if you haven't noticed, it's becoming a bit of a hub here in the Southeast. I think 30% of all franchising revenues in the United States come out of the Southeast. That's over $300 billion. It's 2.6 million jobs. So as the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, there's an ecosystem building around that's pulling more companies here. Just last week, Blaze Pizza, moving from some state out west, I think it's called California, moving here for a variety of reasons, but I think the most important of which is that ecosystem, that kind of concentration that you're getting here. And also, as mentioned, it's not all about restaurant talent or franchising talent. We're all in the technology space now, right? We're all looking for not just to be the best X company, but the best company that does apps, does data, does digital, supply chain, all those types of things. So this flywheel begins, and it's not all PIN. It's a lot of different things, but PIN's an important piece of this, right? That furthers that flywheel along, makes this region even more competitive, and we think builds upon itself. So we're definitely seeing it, and we're very excited about it.
Thank you. And Deborah, if you could bring us home on this topic from the higher ed sector, the research sector, and how that all falls into your strategy.
Yeah, what's great about the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation is that while we're based out of Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech is our home, we actually support all higher ed in the state and in the region. So it's any higher ed. So this includes your R1s, your R2s, your HBCUs, your smaller liberal arts colleges, your technical colleges. Like, we actually have a huge diversity of higher ed because we think of them as a critical partner to the broader, how do we build a next generation of innovators, but also think about lifetime learning. So it's not enough that, you graduate, 3 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. How can you actively, continuously improve and evolve, knowing that technology is actually evolving and moving along with it, and we need to equip ourselves with the ongoing skills in order to move that along. So higher ed is very much a critical partner. What we challenge in higher ed is your traditional town-gown relationship. So what is higher ed supposed to be, which is, incubator for a certain period of time, and then they kind of go back into their Ivy Towers, if you will. How can higher ed be a critical partner in the community because they are an important steward, not only in terms of the service that they provide, but they're an important actor in anchoring the community. And so that is what we change in terms of higher ed, and why we focus so much of our work in terms of how do we bring critical R&D into the community. And when we say this, it's because all communities, not everyone has the access and opportunities to innovation and technology and R&D, right? At the end of the day, there's a huge access and opportunity issue. So where does that R&D come from? It could come from higher ed. So we challenge that to say, how can we translate this from your laboratories or your academic publications into community research, into community benefit, and how can that be a force for good multiplier to really activate? Not only does the research get better because it's challenged by the community and it's implemented, but then of course the communities get to be actively engaged and empowered with that research.
Thank you. And this question is now for the full panel. Anyone, please jump in. When you think about the emerging technologies or sectors that across the southern landscape over the next decade that are in place and will continue to mature, how will that impact the partnership moving forward in it reaching its objectives?
I'll jump in first. I think it's going to continue to grow our private sector partners as we continue to watch different industries gravitate towards us, as we continue to help them grow deeper into their communities, into these rural communities. I think a big part of our story is this inclusiveness that we talk about. Obviously, it's embedded in our ethos and in our name, but we redefine inclusiveness every day, whether it be geographic, economic, educational, industries. We just continue to expand that definition, and I think that's a very attractive feature for different industries as we go and grow. And what we're creating is that actual ecosystem. I think for companies, and companies know this, everybody in this room knows this, but to just only invest in outcomes is a mistake. You have to invest in a process to then create outcomes, and it takes time, and I think businesses are realizing that we here in Georgia are ahead of that curve. We are already making those investments. We are already opening up doors that their team of experts, their team of technologists and planners and decision makers can walk into and be quicker to market with a new product or with a new category or with a new platform. I think that's really what we're trying to create, is that ecosystem. I don't particularly, I wish I knew the next industry, I'd invest in it. But we want to be open for business for all things technology. And to watch these communities come alive, this K through 12, where now all of a sudden they've got, different types of classes going on, different types of curriculums, and then technical schools partnering with a software developer or a hardware developer, and then watching those jobs come back into those rural areas to help recreate those high-paying quality jobs. One last point, one of the biggest accelerators for us was the pandemic. Right? We literally started, I'll never forget, our first meeting was on a Blue Jeans call, which I didn't even know what Blue Jeans was at the time. And and Bud Peterson started the meeting, and we got to rolling. But we literally started in the throes of the pandemic, and I think it really helped accelerate everybody's mindset that was around us, that was investing in us, thinking, wait a minute, we have to be better prepared for this moment in time. And it really helped us drive our message deeper.
Thank you very much. Any other comments?
I would just say that the restaurant industry, I hope I'm not offending anyone in here, is not known as the most sophisticated, tech-forward business on earth. But with COVID on, the amount of disruption that is hitting our space, it just goes to show that no one's immune to what's going on and the pace of innovation that's continued to increase. And it's innovation that we're all better served if we're all included in it. That's the kind of basic premise, and the premise of why Inspire even exists, just to try to keep up with an environment where labor, another surprise, labor's not going back down in cost, inputs aren't going down in cost, so how do you stay ahead of that and continue to grow and be successful? It's going to be massive innovation, and it's going to require all of us.
Let me just add that, for us, we don't innovate just to innovate, right? That's not the end goal. We think of innovation as the catalyst towards upward mobility and economic growth, and that's what propels us. And behind that is the notion that all of the world's problems today cannot be solved by any one single sector. Right? It's very important to have the public-private partnerships to be shared across and include in shared resources and shared risks. And ultimately, we want to build the next generation of leaders that can fluently navigate between public and private sectors. We don't see the jobs of tomorrow being only one sector and you're in there for your lifetime, right? You will need to navigate between these different sectors and build coalitions. And how best can you build coalitions if you don't understand the other agendas or the other cultures or the other sides? And so that is part of the reason why we have these kind of, not only the ecosystem, but the many regional hubs of excellence in terms of innovation. How can you create those innovation hubs? And another good example I will just give you is that we have a project in Milledgeville, Georgia. Has anyone been to Milledgeville, Georgia? Commissioner Nunn, of course. But like Milledgeville, Georgia, right? And it's with Georgia College and State University. And it is a solar certification that we're doing that allows students to not only know how to install solar panels, but then create a business with that solar panel installation. And there has been 40 students that have been trained. They have a waiting list of 150 students, and the students are driving as far as 3 hours away for this free training class, right, within the circumference of Milledgeville. The final project is going to be where the students install the solar panels on Milledgeville's new wastewater treatment plant. So again, going back to public-private partnership, how you can close the loop between just a traditional training, but then apply it to something that the city needs in terms of what the community needs, but what they're going to do anyway. And we're a part of that experience, not only from the education side, but to the workforce development side, and then from the economic quality of life side. That is full circle coming on. And again, you wouldn't think that Milledgeville would be on the forefront of that innovation. We took a delegation that included the mayor of Warner Robins and the mayor of Woodstock to Taipei for an international smart cities conference a couple months ago. And they represented Georgia and talked to their counterparts in Taiwan and won major international smart cities awards. You wouldn't have thought Warner Robins and Woodstock would be. And that is the story where we can open up the doors on who can innovate, one, how they can innovate, and that you can innovate well and good together. It's not mutually exclusive, and that's what the public-private partnership is all about.
The level of involvement and uplifting of bringing people together is truly, really, really special with PIN, so thank you for that. I'm going to pass it to President Yates after this last question to lead our Q&A. I do want to ask everyone to keep the questions focused on today's topic, as well as to please make sure that you feel free to also give feedback on ways you think PIN can help the community in addition to asking questions. It could be a two-way, where we usually just do questions by our members. But if you could briefly share one leadership lesson or one challenge that you had to overcome, however you want to answer this question each in a brief way, that will close us out for the Q&A session to follow.
I'll start. The challenge was getting the legislature to understand how important technology was to the future of our state, right? Taking that short-term sugar high called an election and diffusing that and saying we have to invest intentionally, and we've got to build partnerships with our educational system, with our venture capital partners, with our corporate structures, and really work together. That was a challenge for me to kind of break the strings of gravity with the partnership.
Kristen?
I would just say generally, I've been talking a lot about franchising, but It's a great separation between, short-term business in the day and long-term brand building and development. But sometimes convincing franchisees, particularly I'll use an example in the supply chain, where they have a co-op and we're corporate, convincing them that we're here from corporate and we're here to help. Always a challenge. It's a powerful model, but it's based on mutual trust and continue to earn that trust every day.
Deborah?
Something at the heart for all, I think all innovation, which is MVP, minimal viable product, which is just start somewhere. Don't wait till it gets perfect. Just start and pilot, just do it, and that's what the partnership is. We just had to keep going because the problems of yesterday are critical and need to be addressed now.
Thank you. And our firm was honored to do some pro bono work with many other firms in town, and I really learned how much people do not have broadband and access to technology is a huge issue, especially outside of Atlanta and in economically challenged parts of Atlanta. So we saw a lot of people rally behind the schools, but we also need to rally behind these communities across the state to make sure they have access to these tools and this technology, was my learning. I'll pass it over to President Yates, and thank you again for having us, Jennifer and President Yates.
Thank you. Jim, come on up to the mic and ask your question, please.
Thank you very much. I believe I heard in the introductory remarks that you were planning or you were already scaling this beyond Georgia. Deborah, I'm curious how you are going about developing the relationships and sharing this with neighboring states.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. That's a great question. And the reason why we're doing this is that as much as we think we are Georgia first, and Georgia is obviously our heart and soul, is that Georgia can't be strong if its surrounding states are not strong. And instead of competing with our neighboring states, how can we work together to form bigger opportunities so that both can benefit and the sum is greater than its individual parts? And that is a fundamental reason with our Southeast strategy. So with our Southeast strategy, it's very much continues to be focused on Georgia. We are in all 12 economic development districts, but we find opportunistic projects and partners with its neighboring states. And right now we have 4 other states that we are in. We're in Alabama, South Carolina, and Tennessee, and Kentucky. So 4 neighboring states with 4 different opportunistic projects. A very good example is a project that we have with the South Carolina Quantum Association. So South Carolina, the state, put in millions and millions of dollars in quantum. And we are positioning where we have some fellows that will establish a fintech track where, again, it benefits Georgia and South Carolina together, and how can we build quantum better for the whole region nationally.
Thank you. Keith.
I think, just to play on that, I think that the mentality of the rising tide lifts all boats inside the region is truly a beneficial piece. I also think an incredibly good gift for us is our current chair is Chris Womack, and so Southern Company's regional thinking, he gets it, and so he's really been helping to steer us in those right directions and understanding the dynamics in across the southeastern region. So it's been a great tailwind for us.
Yeah, I would just add, there's a lot of similarities once you start looking, and I'll acknowledge Jamal Lewis and the group here too, that we saw a really good collaboration between Albany, Georgia, and Montgomery, Alabama. And the synergies that these 2 cities can learn from each other, both in terms of their economic development, but also, again, what both can learn as the region develops further.
Keith.
Fantastic. Loved hearing all the innovative ways that you all are pushing the public-private public-private partnerships. I've come out of the nonprofit sector, and we do workforce development at the highest level at Goodwill, but there are many other great nonprofits as well. Has there been much energy around public, private, nonprofit, creating this triangle and producing even at a more exponential level?
Yes, Keith, that's a great question, and I will say that we took our fellows to Goodwill on a trip.
Fantastic.
Yes, and so we definitely highlighted that in terms of Goodwill being a really good leader in workforce development. So yeah, when we say public-private, it's actually very broad in that scope, because that includes universities, that includes nonprofits, that includes the civic sector, and so it's just, it gets to be too long of a, if you say every single organization, but it's all encompassing. It's a big tent, big table. We definitely have some great projects with the civic community, with local governments, with, again, universities, and obviously nonprofits.
Thank you.
I think nonprofits are great at so many things in the community, but they're really good at, you already know where the problem points are at. And so us looking for ways to wrap our arms and come and try and help problem solve together, I think it really helps us. There's an acronym that I always talk about called the 4 C's: churches, charities, corporations, and citizens, kind of working together to wrap their hands around. And I think not always perfect in every scenario, but I think we do a really good job of helping to amplify what you're already great at and just helping to give additional resources and recognition to.
Thank you. Shan.
Great job, team. Wonderful. Deborah, could you talk a little bit, though, about the fellowship? I think it's important that we understand how can people and our students get involved?
Yeah, no, thank you, Shan, as always, honing in on a really interesting question for us. So what we found in the workforce development space is that there's a lot of people doing some amazing work, including Keith and Goodwill. But what we saw was that for those that are early career professionals with a college degree, there wasn't a lot of support. And in part it was because the assumption is that they had a college degree and so it was okay. But what we found is that even if you have a college degree, if you're an early career professional, you still need support. And in some cases you need more support because you graduate with debt. College debt. And so how can we, in the essence of upward mobility, fast track you from a job to a career so you can get that home equity loan, so you can move up, and start building your assets? What's the best way to do this for that segment of the population? And that's, again, a testament to the partnership where we complement the space. It's all about complementing what we see as a vacuum and how can we address it. So we created these one-year fellowships where they spend 6 months in the private sector, 6 months in the public sector along key growth industries, so they build subject matter expertise and networks and contacts along that key growth industry, but they know, again, how to fluently navigate between public-private sectors. So I mentioned fintech earlier, but we have a clean tech one and then also an AI manufactured one. So again, these are like a fellow in clean tech spent 6 months at the Fulton County Office of Sustainability, and then they spent 6 months at Cox Enterprise doing sustainability work from a private sector. So those are the types of synergies that we're seeing. In AI manufacturing, they spent 6 months at Georgia Tech's Manufacturing Institute, and then they spent 6 months at Freudenberg NOK in terms of advanced AI manufacturing. So lots of good ways to not only learn that, but then we put an overlay on it where we have site visits, like to Goodwill, and to other places, and then mentorship and career development. So they organize themselves as a cohort, and then at the end, they can obviously be in a much better position to get a job. And we had a stat where 80% of our fellows got a job within 3 months of their job upon graduation. So really, really great in terms of what we're trying to build in terms of that kind of experience and knowledge.
So we've included a few leadership lessons. As you know, our theme this year, leadership lessons for service and growth. Let me ask Christian. Christian, you mentioned you moved about 6 years ago. To what extent do you think the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation is a driver for bringing companies here to Georgia? And have you found that it's been an incentive in that regard? We also have a number of consul generals from various countries who are thinking about where they would bring companies. Is the partnership something that's a key factor for us to consider promoting to get people to come here?
Yes, and yes. I mean, I would say Inspire Brands is only 6 years old. PIN is what, 3 years old. So, I would say the pace of companies moving here and the innovation infrastructure that we need to continue building, that's broad-based and driving upward mobility. I mean, I would say that the mandate is there, and the communities that don't have that, don't have the PINs yet. And by the way, when you want to go outside the Southeast, we're national, so we'll talk about that when you're ready. I think you're going to start seeing a wider disparity between the business communities and regions that are embracing broad-based innovation and those that are not. Thank
you for being here. So I want to ask Jeff a question too. Jeff said earlier that you try to stay away from the political side of things, but that's very hard to do, Jeff. In your situation, if someone
not as hard as you think.
If someone were to come to you and say, listen, I think this is a great idea, but come up with some political reason why it didn't make sense, not to get political about it, but how do you confront that? How do you explain the value of the partnership aside from politics?
Well, I think Raphael's stats on what the return on investment is, I mean, there's very little that we do at the Capitol that has anywhere close to this kind of return on investment in these communities, as to looking for ways to amplify and to grow stuff, programs that are already successful, companies that already know what they need to do, communities that already know what their problems are, looking for vehicles to deliver. And that was one of the things, I think, is we attract new private partnerships to come in, as we look for new companies that want to invest in us. We accelerate their ability to work with those other communities, to work with those different lanes in industries or supplier channels. So all of that, we accelerate because we've got these trusted relationships and we're already testing how to work with those educational partners. So yeah, it's just a great return on investment, which isn't always, look, I'm kind of funny tongue-in-cheek when I say this, but it's hard to get, beat the return on investment. Chris Nunn is, he's shaking his head, he understands this. It's hard to make that as a case inside of a committee room sometimes as to what a return on investment is. But when you actually play it out, and I think Georgia does a much better job than our peers in other states do, of looking at what does our state want to be in 10 years? What does our state want to be in 20 years? We have to make investments like this.
Thank you. And Deborah, maybe a final question. You mentioned earlier that you're first of all seeking the problem in the community, and your leadership lessons highlight this, trying to find what's that problem. And you've mentioned a few other cities in our state. Atlanta has a few problems as well. Our mayor has been highlighting a couple of them recently, whether it be water or crime or the like. What is the partnership doing here in Atlanta, and what can these Atlanta leaders be thinking about if they say, this is a problem we're seeing in the community? I wonder if the partnership could help.
Well, I would open this up for the whole room because we are all Atlanteans, we have like a whole host of projects that we have in Metro Atlanta. Obviously, I named Thomasville Heights earlier, but we also have a transportation project for the city right now that's happening. So, if you think that there's an opportunity for the partnership to be involved, we love to hear from you. We love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, this is an active, request and welcome in terms of internships, fellowships, research projects, entrepreneurial kind of types of projects. So lots of different ways, and we love to hear from you. And part of this is as a discovery. What can we do together? What can we do in partnership?
Deborah, I want to thank you, Jeff, Christian, Dan, Raphael for a wonderful presentation. Let's give them a hand, please. Please remember next week's program should be very exciting, learning about two very exciting and new public companies. With that, please come up and thank our panelists, and meeting adjourned.